The trophy halls of gaming's greatest accomplishments are long and wide at this point. Even within the last decade, there are so many outstanding gaming experiences with wonderful stories, fantastic characters, and fun, visceral gameplay. There are few, however, that stand quite as tall as the original Metal Gear Solid, both in terms of nailing its gameplay elements with snappy menus and intuitive controls, and breaking new ground with its story and characters. The original Metal Gear Solid was, and still is, an exemplary force to be reckoned with. To even casual gamers, the Metal Gear Solid name evokes feelings of awe and admiration. Those who grew up alongside the 32-bit systems and saw the maturing of the polygon era firsthand probably experienced Metal Gear Solid in one way or another. The brand wasn't quite what it became several sequels and spin-offs later, but it was still regarded as a timeless trailblazer that countless games would be destined to imitate and emulate in the future. With Kojima's newest work on the precipice of release, it's important to understand some of his previous triumphs, Metal Gear Solid being one of the greatest. Starting off, the game seemed like a fairly boilerplate spy thriller. The first stage, that would later become iconic, was heavy on details and immediately bombarded the player with more information and setup than what would normally be expected in 1998. This is something that games generally shied away from, since gamers picked up games to play them, not watch them. But Metal Gear Solid brought such a cinematic mentality to it, with dynamic cinematography, outstanding writing, and expertly directed performances, that it didn't matter. The cutscenes in Metal Gear Solid would ultimately be more entertaining than many other games' core gameplay elements. And it worked right from the start. Once the game actually gets going, Snake arrives at and is tasked with sneaking into a nuclear disposal facility in Alaska's Fox Archipelago that's been hijacked by a team of rogue, genetically modified special forces. Interesting? Yeah. But nothing unlike what people have already seen in action spy movies before. What Metal Gear Solid injected into the fairly ordinary setup was a sense of precision and dedication. It was as if the game was saying, yeah, this is a spy thriller game, but it's going to be the best spy thriller game you've ever played. And as Metal Gear Solid unfolded, this truth became more and more irrefutable. The overhead default camera angle might seem archaic today, but at the time it allowed the player to see what he or she needed to see, whether that be items, hiding places, or enemy pathways, without showing too much of the level at once. This might have been a way to keep the game running smoothly, but it also made all of the special camera angles that later sections would employ stand out even more, further driving home the cinematic feel of the game. Players could also go into a first-person view at any time if they wanted a better look. As anybody who plays video games knows, gameplay itself is king. There is little to be gained from having interesting characters and a great story if the gameplay isn't also up to par. Metal Gear Solid not only managed to stitch together fun gameplay in a still new era of polygons in three-dimensional space while other developers were still struggling with it, but Kojima and his team at Konami also went above and beyond to create a button layout and movement system that feels deliberate and natural, even today. Granted, it might take a little getting used to going back from a game like Horizon Zero Dawn to Metal Gear Solid, but after a little bit of time, even the most modern-minded gamers can get into it. Especially since the characters often break the fourth wall to remind you of how it all works, which is a nice touch. The radar's illustrations of cones of vision is a technique that has been replicated countless times by games, and even today works well, virtually unchanged. While Metal Gear Solid isn't the first game to do three-dimensional stealth well, as Tenchu Stealth Assassins also did it pretty well nearly a year earlier, but Metal Gear Solid went out of its way to make sure players knew what the rules were and gave them the tools to weigh various risk factors and make their own decisions in any given situation. Security cameras, footprints in the snow, and various noise levels were all factors to consider. Snake being able to knock on walls to distract and separate enemies, jam camera feeds at the expense of his own radar, and use the infamous cardboard boxes were all tools at your disposal among many others. The near-endless combination of situations and solutions created by these environmental factors and Snake's inventory is impressive even by today's standards. The game's characters, from Otacon, Meryl, the Colonel, and even Snake himself, all start out filling the shoes of the roles fine, but slowly undergo major developments, and gracefully morph into very flawed and interesting human characters that cannot always be trusted and often subvert your expectations, for both valiant and selfish reasons. The Colonel alone goes from being one of Snake's longtime confidants at the beginning to a borderline villain at the end of the second act, and does everything he can to redeem himself and forges an even deeper friendship with Snake by the end than they had at the start. But that's just one example. All of the major and most of the minor characters have similar arcs that take them from different shades of friendliness to antagonism for a variety of reasons. Snake's comrades aren't the only focal point though. Unlike most games of the era, and frankly even modern games, the villains in Metal Gear Solid are fleshed out and just as complex as anyone else. Much like how Metal Gear's good guys often flirt with antagonistic tendencies, many of the actual antagonists become so captivating and endearing that by the time they leave the story, it's sad to see them go. Sniper Wolf and Vulcan Raven in particular have such heartbreaking origins and motivations behind their actions, the player will often find themselves sympathetic to them and at times struggling with feelings of guilt for ending their lives. This unprecedented level of depth and connection with the player in a video game was not even remotely comparable to anything else at the time. On top of all of that is a warm blanket of mystery and plot twists concerning Snake's personal origins, his connection with the villain, and the baffling, sometimes borderline supernatural occurrences that touch each of the characters and influence the direction of the story. Keeping up with it all is the pinnacle of what it means to be entertained and engaged by a video game. It's truly a testament to the writing and direction of Kojima and his team that so much complexity could even be remotely digestible. But because of the expert level delivery and pacing of everything that goes on, it all goes down smoothly for anyone who's willing to taste it. With classic titles before it and outstanding sequels after it, Metal Gear Solid stands right in the middle of the classic era and the modern era, combining elements from both to bridge the gap between them with its timeless story and intuitive controls. Only in recent years do either of these elements begin to show any sort of age, and even still, the charm of it all completely overwhelms any disappointment you might feel from seeing the jagged edges and smudgy textures of the era. It delivers nothing short of excellence at every turn, and the undeniable combination of complex characters, dynamic storytelling, and inventive gameplay is what make Metal Gear Solid the very definition of a timeless classic, and without a doubt, one hell of a game. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to ensure you'll be notified when new videos go up.